Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 29. Am I transphobic? Also known as Hands, are we the baddies? So this is another epistemological episode and also something of a current affairs video. Follows on from the How Do I Know If I'm Right episode and the non-binary gender video. This is also in response, somewhat, to the screaming after Rationality Rules recent video. All those people screaming transphobia. But is he? Are they? As per usual, we need to nail down a few things first before we can discuss them. So what even is transphobia? Well, any online dictionary will give you a basic definition of something like dislike of or prejudice against transsexual or transgender people. But, like racism, people have a tendency to assume that this means big, obvious, terrible things like violent beatings, riotings in the street and fires. While sadly that does happen in some cases, that is not all that transphobia is, just the worst and most visible forms of it. And people seem to assume that if this is not what they're doing, then what they are doing cannot be transphobic. The most common forms of transphobia in action on a day-to-day basis are things like refusing to respect the gender identity of the person, insisting that you know better what and who they are than they do, for example. Trans people are accepted, just not as the opposite sex. I refuse to call a man a woman just because it might hurt his feelings. Just the same as I refuse to acknowledge the existence of Yahweh or Jesus for exactly the same reason. That's a direct quote from someone defending Rationality Rules on Facebook. In some ways, it's a little like racism. Sure, lynchings are very racist and terrible, but so are discriminatory housing or hiring policies, racially targeted policing, and racial slurs. And the thing is, you may well not think on the inside like the stereotypical racist or homophobe or transphobe, but we can't read your mind. We can only go on what you say or do. So if you make transphobic statements or acts, we have to take you as a transphobe, regardless of what you may feel on the inside. Because it's what you're doing that's the issue, not what you might be thinking. Okay, so what would an act of transphobia be, and why would it be an act of transphobia? Well, anything that deliberately acts against the interests of trans people would be transphobic. Also, it's possible through ignorance to be accidentally transphobic. This is not great, but as long as when somebody points it out to you, you correct it, no worries. So we've covered some of the super obvious stuff. Yes, it's transphobic to physically or verbally attack a trans person. But that's like Nazi levels of transphobia. What are some everyday examples? Well, if you're telling a trans person that they're not really their chosen gender, that a trans man isn't really a trans man, or a trans woman isn't really a trans woman, or even a non-binary person isn't really non-binary, that would be an example. You're not only being a dick to them, you're just wrong, and the science doesn't agree with you. Worse yet, if you try to defend it using science, you're doubly wrong. Okay, so why is this transphobic? Well, sex and gender are more than simply what collection of parts you have, and that by insisting that your interpretation of their identity is the right one, you are essentially telling them that they're wrong about their own identity. It's not transphobic to mention in the discussion about the topic that a typical trans man does not have a Y chromosome. This is generally true and factual. But to then say that this makes them not a man, or is really a woman, that's transphobic. It's factually wrong. There are plenty of men in the world who lack a Y chromosome without also being trans, and just because they are a minority does not mean that they magically fail to count or fail to exist. Being a man is not a measure of chromosomes. Almost no actual men have actually had a gene test to know for certain what chromosomes they've got. And it hurts the person. No amount of, but I was just saying the truth, will change that. And it makes you the asshole. But here's the worst part. It also makes other, worse people feel safe to do worse than what you're doing. Just because you might be limited to only harsh words, that doesn't mean that other people are limited in the same way. This is how trans people get attacked. Some minority of people are just looking for an excuse, and this helps them feel safe and helps them fabricate one of those excuses. If you treat a trans person in a way that is different and negative to how you treat or react to a cis person, that's transphobic. If you kick up a fuss because your kid's kindergarten teacher is trans, and for no other reason, that would be another example of transphobia. Saying that non-binary people or trans people don't exist or are mentally ill is in the same vein. The medical professional says, you are wrong. Also consider this. If it were true that being trans was a mental illness, why are you attacking a mentally ill person for being mentally ill? What kind of asshole does that make you? Another example is a follow-on from before, when you insist that you know a trans person's identity better than they do, and they're just really confused about their gender or sexuality. You know better. And let's not forget the well-known idea that trans people are perverts. Yep, that's transphobic, and maybe homophobic, all at the same time. And last but not least, insisting that, despite all evidence to the contrary, that allowing trans people to use the bathroom of their choice will lead to threats and assaults against little girls. How odd that no one ever wonders about little boys, or what happens to the trans woman who is forced into the men's bathroom, despite the long history of trans women being abused, even more than trans men. See footnote number 1 for a list of transphobic issues. Okay, so is there anything we can say about the subject that isn't transphobic? Well, any statements of fact regarding trans people are not themselves transphobic. However, they can be used in ways that are. For example, if I am a trans man, it is accurate to say to me, you do not have a Y chromosome. That's not transphobic, that's just a matter of fact, like counting the number of fingers that I've got. But if you are taunting me, ha 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 ha, you'll never have a Y chromosome, you freak, then yeah, you're transphobic. Also, you're an asshole. It's important to be able to tell the difference, because otherwise we'll never get through any conversations, at least not without stepping on a verbal minefield. And we have to be able to talk about this stuff. We have to be able to discuss the issues. We have to be able to educate people who are well-meaning, but actually have no idea because this is all new to them. And we have to be able to tell who is actually transphobic and who's not, so that we don't fall into the trap of just screaming, transphobic bigot, at every single person that says something that relates to the issue. Otherwise, I'm transphobic for even having this conversation about how to be not transphobic. Well, why does this matter? Well, we can't read your mind. We have to infer what you are thinking, and therefore who you are, based on what we see you say and do. Which is why you have to be aware of what you say and do. Telling us all how great and non-transphobic you are when you do and say transphobic things really doesn't do any good at all, especially when we're used to seeing that sort of thing from politicians. Oh no, I'm not racist, says Mr. Politician, and then enacts a whole bunch of bills that discriminate against black people and target them unfairly. Yeah, we've all seen it before. When you leave out of the story things like magical mind-reading powers, what is the difference between a transphobe who says that they're not, and someone who really isn't a transphobe, but keeps saying transphobic things? And that brings me to my last point. Trans men are men, trans women are women. I get the impression that people who hear this slogan think that what it means is, we should treat them all like men or women, just like they say. This is not just a slogan. Sure, uncomprehending or confused tolerance is better than outright hatred. It's a start. But while that attitude might help the people who are suffering from the hatred, it does not fix the underlying issue, which is that the tolerant person just does not get or does not believe the trans person. They are humouring them. But what that slogan is trying to tell you is that a trans man is a man in the way that matters most, the brain. Everything else of the body is just window dressing. You are your brain. See my previous vids on non-binary gender, gender and transhumanism, also identity for details. No, that's not a woman pretending, or a tomboy, or a butch chick being weird. They are a man who had the bad luck to be born with the wrong genital. Just like a person who was born with one leg shorter than the other. And it's not for us to say how far a person should or should not go to be who they need to be. To wrap up, if somebody said what you said was phobic in some way, whether it be transphobic, homophobic, or even racist, which is xenophobic. Stop. Then check to see if they are right, because you might have said something ignorant or thoughtless. And for maximum rationality points, run it past somebody else, someone you trust. Conversely, if you think somebody else said something phobic, stop and check what they said. Did they actually say something that denigrates, runs down, or attacks the affected group? Or did they simply wander close to the edge? Or did they say something ignorant but well-meaning? Maybe try educating. And then, if that doesn't work, and the mask slips off, and they stand revealed in all their angry and phobic glory, then okay, maybe give them both barrels then. But check first, because when the right tries to paint social justice warriors, the left, basically anybody left of Hitler, as a fragile snowflake and a ranting idiot who just screams homophobe at the drop of a hat, I like it when they're wrong. And I have a suspicion that you do as well. So that's all for today. Tune in next time for either what are prisons really for, or why worshipping God is immoral. Bye for now.